Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Keller, and today we are going to be talking about something super fun. It is the EDEE 223 Language Arts course in winter 2025. This is my reflective learning podcast. So let's just get right into it. I'm kind of going to structure this based on the 4 ELA competencies. So I'm just going to go through each one in order and talk about what comes to mind in relation to the course and maybe some other things. So to start, we have competency 1, which is to read and listen to literary, popular, and information-based texts. So one aspect of this competency is to construct a profile of self as a reader. And this made me think of, I think in the beginning of the course, we did something like this, thinking about ourselves as a reader and our history. And unfortunately, I'm not a reader. I used to be, when I was younger, I used to read so much, but then I don't know what happened. I don't really read anymore. So as a teacher, I think that's a weakness because I want to cultivate that same love of reading in my students, but it's hard to kind of tell them to do that if you don't yourself do it. So that's something that I definitely want to work on. I'm definitely literate, but I just don't read books that often. However, for this course, I did read The Night Gardener by the Fan Brothers, which granted is a picture book, so it was kind of easy, and Shelter by Christy Matheson, which I really enjoyed, which was a young adult novel, and it kind of did inspire me to get back into reading because I thoroughly enjoyed both of those. So another aspect of this competency 1 is to construct his or her own view of the world through reading and listening to literacy text. So this is something that I did way more when I was little. Like I said, I used to read way more. And then it also reminded me of this reading we did in class by Strong Wilson from 2006, where she talks about story times creating bonding experiences, which is something very personal to me because I remember my dad used to read to me and my sister almost every night, and definitely as we read together, we were creating that experience together. So I think that's something really beautiful about reading. And then in the classroom, when we're thinking about books for the classroom, I remembered this reading we did about choosing critical texts. So reading novels from the point of view of another child in a different culture or in another country, or going through something difficult like war. These are really important to have in the classroom. It helps introduce our students to these important social issues. And then as you read, you can ask students these critical questions to really think deeper. And now I'm going to move on to competency 2, which is to write self-expressive, narrative, and information-based texts. Right off the bat in this course, I remember we did a few quick writes, which is basically where you say, okay, clear your mind, just write what comes to mind. Don't worry about grammar, spelling, just write for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it is, and then I'll tell you when to stop. And I think these are a really great way. I actually saw my stage teacher do this during my FE1, and it is a really great way to just get students writing, making that mind to pencil connection. It's not graded. We don't want students to be worried about spelling. It's really just to get your ideas out there and just write. So I really enjoyed doing these in class, and I definitely plan to have these in my classroom. It can also just be a great like introduction or activity to just start off, kind of like a brainstorm. Like a brainstorm. And now I'm going to talk about competency 3, which is to represent her or his literacy in different media. So one aspect of this competency is to follow a production process in order to communicate for specific purposes to a specified audience. So this makes me think of the PowerPoint that we made for Courageous Conversation. So specific audience with specific purposes, and we used a media platform, being PowerPoint. And another aspect is to follow a process to respond to media text. So this reminds me of responding to other people's Courageous Conversations presentation, and then also responding to articles and the discussion boards. So in this way, we're representing our literacy by typing something out on my courses or speaking verbally, which actually I'll get into in a later part of this podcast. And then another part is to construct her or his own view of the world through the media. So this reminds me of this video we watched about where the wild things are, and the pictures. Like, the pictures are part of the story. The story wouldn't be the same without it. So in this sense, like, the pictures are the media, and they're conveying a meaning that is important to understand. So literacy isn't just about words and spelling. It's also about the meanings that we're drawing from these texts from various different medias. And then it also reminds me of a reading we did called The Changing Face of Literacy, where, it talks about that, like, the elements of a text allow it to achieve its function. So sometimes the features of a text or media, whatever it will be, will help it achieve its function. Kind of like the example I just said, Where the Wild Things, the pictures and the book format really helps it to convey meaning. And then this reading also talks about when students are asked to be producers, they discover that all meanings in media were made in a very conscious, deliberate fashion, which is very true, because sometimes we think, everything is neutral. It's just kind of there and made. But when we ask students to produce their own media, they kind of realize for themselves how much thought is put into it, and how really you can, show anything in any sort of light to convey a certain meaning. So this reminds me of an activity that I made for, I think it was the novel study. Yeah, students created a comic strip. So after they read Shelter, they would create a short comic strip for a moment they choose. So, for example, that activity would help students kind of be on the other side of it. Instead of analyzing the media, they're creating the media. And I think that's really valuable in an English classroom. And finally, the last competency 4, to use language to communicate and learn. So one part of this competency is to use language to communicate information, experiences, and point of view. This reminds me of all of our many group class discussions, which I actually heavily enjoyed and always looked forward to. And then also Courageous Conversations, responding verbally to other people's prompts. So in this way, we're using our language of talking to communicate how we feel and information and experiences. So I think that's really great to practice doing that. And finally, just language as a vehicle kind of to promote learning. Like, language And learning is such a social process. We really want our students to be talking and sharing and talking about themselves and talking to other people. It kind of reminds me, like, I'm learning French as a second language, and I find it's almost impossible to just study in my room. Like, the only time I actually learn is when I'm practicing by speaking to someone and practicing listening to them. And then also, I teach English as a second language, and the kids who speak and talk learn so much faster. So I think it's really important in my classroom to create like a really welcoming space for all students to share, because in that way they can learn. And finally, that just reminds me of a reading about reading during read alouds and students kind of interrupting. We kind of want to reframe it from like, oh, they're just, interrupting and being rude, but they're creating their own understanding, and they might do this by comparing to things in their life and saying, oh, wait, like I've seen that before, or, that reminds me of this. So it's really important to create kind of an open space for students to share and put in their own input. So yes, that's all. Thank you for listening. Melanie, if you're listening, thank you for a great course. I enjoyed every second of it, and I can't wait to teach ELA in my classroom.